I sat all morning thinking about everything, cup after cup of coffee in front of me to keep me awake. Once the postman had left and I was alone with my thoughts, they just continued to get louder. I thought about Natalia and the cult, about the kids and their nighttime antics, about the committee meeting, Jamie, and how much I missed him, Georgia, and my burning guilt, Mr. Prentice, who was finally making those aforementioned animal noises. Most of all, I thought about the note left for me on move-in day and how it had changed everything. My whole life was different now. I was alone, and I felt like my new home was attacking me from every angle. I reread the note a few times over my coffee. I was worried about my rent. It was tight, but manageable. School is currently out in the UK, but as a training teacher assigned to a school, I still get paid a small amount for the summer. At least the rent is low. And with a second summer job, I can just about make it without Jamie. It sounds strange, but it honestly felt nice to worry about something normal for a minute. Even if I should have been worrying about my survival and the many entities currently trying to kill me. But I didn't get to stew for too long. I had to get ready for the committee meeting, and after the events of the night before and my growing mistrust of Prudence, it was imperative that I got the neighbors on side if I was going to achieve anything like my goals of eradicating the imposter/cultist neighbors. The meeting today was at noon in flat 31. There was a poster on a communal notice board by the entrance that I was glad to spot. Terry hadn't mentioned the time when we met, and all our meetings since then had been a bit hectic to discuss it. The poster promised tea and cakes. My stomach rumbled at the thought. I honestly hadn't eaten properly in days. At 11:15, I left the flat and I wandered out into the corridor. I'd never seen so many neighbors. Mr. Prentice, however, was still making that awful noise, and I watched in disbelief as every single person in the corridor just walked by the door as if it was silent. I did my usual deliberation on whether to take the stairs or the lift, but yet again, the stairs won. I still couldn't bear it being where Jamie had died, and all these extra flights were keeping me fit. Flat 31 belonged to an older lady named Molly Thompson and her husband Eric. She had a blue rinsed hat of curls attached to her head, and had gone to the effort of making homemade Battenberg cake. Other neighbors had bought along baked good as well. It reminded me of a school fair. The flat itself was decorated for the 70s. With plenty of china cat ornaments littered around, I sat down on a dusty plastic garden chair, one of the many that Molly seemed to have acquired and laid out for the residents pouring in. I hadn't seen community spirit like this in my entire life. When I saw Terry, Eddie, and Ellie wander in, I smiled. It was nice to see some familiar faces. I had noticed people looking at me, wondering who I was. It probably wasn't often that I got new neighbors. Eddie came running up to me, swung his arm around me, and sat down in the rickety garden chair next to mine. It was so sweet. Terry smiled back at me and took a seat at the other side of mine. Ellie sat next to her brother. The brown puppy dog eyes were back. No clothes. "I'm glad you came," Terry said to me, loud enough to hear over the voices of the other neighbors. "I really want you to see the good side of the block. We don't bite, really." She laughed nervously as she realized the irony of her statement. "Terry, I need help. We need to stop those people from coming back again and terrorizing people. The block can't go on like this." I wanted to make the purpose of my attendance clear to her. It was time for things to change. "But if you don't let them come in, they don't bother you. I've spoken to the kids, and they know not to do it again. That those people are dangerous." She paused for a moment and sighed. Although them running away didn't help. The kids think they're indestructible now. They've been telling me all morning that they're going to kill the bad guys. She looked so resigned, but it was true. They did run away from the twins. Maybe there was something in that. I knew they could die. I just had to work out how. But as the thought crossed my mind and I looked at Eddie and Ellie, I just couldn't imagine taking the risk. I could have flat out gone back and asked Prudence, but to be honest, I didn't want anything to do with her. She gave me such a bad feeling. I was doubting everything she told me. It doesn't matter if you can keep them away. We can't all live in fear. Yours aren't the only kids in this building. I knew this from surveying the room, but I bet not all the kids here are as special as yours. What if another family burns to death because their kids were hyper one night? I could see it struck a chord with Terry. She looked at me with glassy eyes, as if on the verge of tears. You're right. Molly is the chairwoman, and she can be a little strict, but you can bring it up under any of her business. She spoke with a lump in her throat. Here you go, by the way. She handed me a piece of printed paper. Any of her business felt a bit lackluster, but it would do, as long as it got discussed. I turned my attention to the piece of paper. It was the agenda for the meeting. For something written so formally, it appeared absurd. It seemed other flats and floors had different, but equally strange issues to mine. There are only 6 items on the agenda for the meeting with AOB as the 7th, and they were as follows. Number 1. Welcome and introductions with apologies for absence. Number 2. Replacing of the flickering lights on floor 11. It seems to incite vicious behavior from the pets and elderly of that floor. Number 3. Serving a formal residence letter of concern to the man who doesn't move from the bottom of the stairwell on floor 5. Step 4. Finances. Budgets for general maintenance and the annual barbecue. Step 5. The stairs with no grip leading up to floor 14 at the very top and the health and safety hazards this presents. Step 6. Soundproofing of Mr. Prenton's flat. Number 48. I was comforted to know that I wasn't alone in dealing with all these strange occurrences. I was also chilled to the core to know for certain that it was the entire building that was more than a bit odd. But what really struck me as odd is that when I thought about it, I had seen that man on floor 5 when going down the stairs, but I never noticed that it had been every time, or that he never moved, until this moment. And then the meeting began with a loud and dissatisfying clink. By this point, the tiny 70s theme flat was packed. Garden chairs had all ran out and people were standing. Molly Thompson stood up from her floral-patterned armchair and bashed a teaspoon against the outside of her cup. She reminded me of a very strict disciplinarian school teacher I had worked with during my university placement. She commanded quiet in the room. Well, I think we should get started, everyone, she shrilled, her voice growing louder with every word until the crowd came to a silent hum. Rightly, first, we are not going to skip the introductions today. Apologies have been given by Joe and Steph of Flat 2, and yet again by Mr. Prentice. We have a new face in the room, as sure as many of you have noticed. She gestured to me and looked in my direction, but didn't really make any eye contact. She was just talking about me as I sat in the room. Eventually, she addressed me directly. Stand up, dear. Introduce yourself. We're pleased to have you here. I was deeply uncomfortable. I could feel some sort of panic coming on. I never liked standing in crowds very much, but I stood up anyway. Hi. My name is Kat, and I live in flat number 42. I moved in here with my boyfriend Jamie, but he was killed in the lift by some weird rat creature you people have living here, and the people that claim to live in the burned out flats won't leave me alone, and one in particular seems to want me dead. Oh, and that window cleaner outside my flat makes me want to scoop out my own eyes with a spoon every time he knocks on the door. But nice to meet y'all. The crowd had gasped a little. I sat down, instantly mortified. I don't know what happened. The normality and structure of the meeting overwhelmed me. There's something about a sense of order and normality against chaos. It does something to your brain, and for me, for the first time in this whole journey, it sent me into a meltdown. I sobbed as soon as I hit my chair, both in pure mental exhaustion and disappointment that I'd blown my chance at building any sort of army against Natalia. Terry rubbed my shoulder. Molly, broke the awkward silence that had blanketed the room. Nice to meet you, Catherine. I understand life in this building can be a little overwhelming. We didn't ask the previous occupant to let us intervene when you moved in, but she was insistent. In hindsight, we may need to review our policies on new tenants. I am so very sorry for the loss of your partner. The lift is a most unfortunate situation. She had been in positions of power in her life for certain. She responded professionally, but coldly. There was no feelings in her condolences, and she came off like a corrupt politician digging themselves out of a hole. She did decide to skip the introductions after my outburst. I also hate it when I'm called Catherine. My parents named me Katie, and I shortened it to Cat. Her presuming it was Catherine added to her school teacher demeanor. She carried on with the proceedings pretty swiftly, and interesting characters present at the meeting started to emerge. My favorite was a large, middle-aged Caribbean woman named Precious St. Fleur, who would not accept Molly's claims that there was not enough in the budget to replace the lighting on floor 11. She got up and lifted her shirt to reveal a large, deep bite mark across her stomach, caused by her dog after a long episode of the lights flickering. And when that didn't change Molly's answer, she lifted her trouser leg to reveal a smaller but still noteworthy bite mark into her leg from her elderly mother who lives with her. Molly didn't budge. It took what felt like an eternity to get to any other business, and if I weren't so focused on my goal, I would have enjoyed hearing about the quirks of the other floors, maybe tried to engage a little, but I just couldn't concentrate. When the chairwoman asked me if anyone had other business, she scanned the room quickly. I stood up from my chair, and she locked in on me with her eyes. My hands were shaking, and I could feel a cold sweat forming all over my body. "Catherine, what can we help you with, dear?" she asked in a patronizing tone. "I want help in getting rid of the people pretending to be from the burned-out flats. I can't be the only person that doesn't like living in fear," I stated boldly, trying not to break down again. "Dear, we have had this discussion multiple times and it's been taken off the agenda. I am aware you're new here, but there is nothing we can do about certain problems within this building, and for this particular issue, we would appreciate you not letting them into your home and ignoring them like the rest of us." She snapped back. "That's not good enough. Terry's kids answered the door last night. They're children. It's easily done. What if someone else's child does it and aren't so lucky to survive? One burned my friend so bad a few nights ago that she's still unconscious in hospital. This, I knew from social media. A few people called out an agreement with me from the crowd. The only one who has ever been able to deal with them is Prudence. And that difficult woman never revealed her methods. Don't think we didn't try. You're suggesting a suicide mission. You'd do well to remember you are new here." Molly hissed through her teeth. Did she have to mention I was new here so many times? It was grating on me. "Well, I'm willing." She seemed stronger than the rest in her earlier rant. I was glad to have her on side, and when she came forward, a few others followed. Soon, I had 5 people plus myself willing to form a subcommittee to it. There was me, Precious, and Terry, along with a lady named Shanti, who lived a few doors from me. A man named Edson and his friend Leo from floor 8 made up the group. To be honest, they just seemed keen to get involved with any kind of battle. Leo was the loud one. Anton was mostly silent. I invited them to my flat after Molly swiftly adjourned the meeting. Inviting anyone into my home made me anxious now. I found myself studying each of their faces to ensure that they weren't too average, and I hadn't invited the wrong people in. I was fairly certain that I hadn't. Eddie and Ellie settled in front of my TV in the bedroom so that they didn't hear our conversation. They may only be kids, but I felt safer with them there. We discussed for hours how we could bring the imposter people into one place and kill them all. Leo was particularly creative. He came up with weird and wacky ways to end them, from locking them in a room and blasting them with fire extinguishers until they freeze, to herding them into the lift between 1:11 and 3:33 a.m. The whole time, I waited nervously for a knock on the door for them to come for us, but they didn't. We got time to plan, but despite the time, it never really took off. No idea seemed feasible. I shared everything that I knew. My conversation with Peru, the night before in Terry's flat, everything. Precious listened to my tales intently before speaking. "Derek would have helped us. He was a great man. He used to turn up at my door in the dead of the night, just as those lights started, and take my dog for a walk. She spoke of the gardener with a fondness. Prudence told me about Dirk. She said he's been gone since the garden was demolished. I replied flatly. It was awful when he left. That woman used to live here was nasty to him. I watched out my window as she tore up the garden. I knew she was grieving for that little girl, but I know Derek only wanted to help. Auntie spoke up from the corner. She had been pretty quiet the whole time. He was the whole reason why we don't have those awful creatures when they lived all over our homes anymore. My brother was killed by one of those before the agreement. He was only 4 years old. I twitched as she told her story. Shanti has such sad eyes, and speaking about her brother only filled them further with sadness. This is another thing I don't understand. Why have an agreement if you managed to kill most of them? Why not all? I asked, feeling anger over Jamie burned from my throat as I spoke. No one's told you the full story, have they? Shanti asked, with a tear running down her face. What do you mean? This was driving me insane. Nothing was simple. How could I trust anyone? When Prudence and some of the others killed the creatures, they killed a large group of them in one hit. They had to work out that food scraps and pet food were attracting them, and they gathered all the pet food in the tower block into one empty flat on the floor. This was the floor that the fire had happened. And just like that, the creatures came in droves, just like expected, and they set the flat alight. The flat was burned to ash on top of the pre-existing ash. Nothing could survive that. Shanti was interrupted by the soft Leo. And then 3 giant rat motherfuckers literally rose from the ashes, triple and smart and strong and fucked shit up, he said with a look of excitement on his face. Shanti rolled her eyes and continued. So all Prudence did was cause quite literally a bigger problem. She didn't kill them. All she did was help them evolve. There was only 3 of them, but they learned how to sneak attack. More people died than during the original infestation. They were more intelligent, but not in the way that it comes across when the agreement's spoken about. We couldn't speak to or reason with them. Terry was looking at the floor. Only Derek was able to do that. He spoke to them like he spoke to the garden. He made it safe for everyone again, and I wasn't there. I was too young, but we were told he didn't even have to use words. They understood just a series of movement and eye contact. Derek explained that the rule with the lift, he said it was a gesture of goodwill. The creatures needed a home and seemed attracted to the building, and we would let them live there and stop killing their kind if they would stop killing ours. But to show them some respect, we would allow them a small time frame, unleash their instinctual nature, but only if someone came to them. There are only 2 left now. Prudence killed the other enduring what happened with her granddaughter, but that only made the other 2 stronger. It was like they absorbed the burn. I tried to take in all the information I was receiving, but I just couldn't. It was too much. Derek isn't coming back. It's been years. This is pointless. Terry finally interrupted. Precious laughed again. How do you know? You speak to dear old Prue all the time. Know something that we don't? Precious spoke sarcastically. But I think she meant what she said. It was becoming clear that Prudence Hemmings wasn't too popular in this building. I don't speak to her all the time. We just keep in contact. She was always nice to me. Terry tried weakly to defend herself. Well, that's because you're naive and a pushover. She yearns to you because no one else would give her the time of day. Precious was about to launch into a full rant on Terry. I was just glad Eddie and Ellie were in the other room and couldn't hear. But I'd wondered if she's seen them at night. I decided to stop the rant. This was becoming counterproductive, and we were getting nowhere with our plans. I interjected and told them all that I needed to leave so that I could sleep. Partially true, although I knew I couldn't sleep. I had other things to do. They all filed out of my flat. Terry and the kids were the last to leave. She gave me a hug as she left and told me to get a proper night's rest, telling me she was always there for a cuppa in the chat. It was sweet. I felt sorry for Terry, and the kids hugged me too as they left. I know she spoke to Prue, but I was certain that it was entirely innocent. I sat in the empty flat, disheartened that my assembling of an army had turned into a bickering shit show with no real suggestions on how to kill the imposter neighbors. I felt totally alone. I couldn't trust Prue or Ian, or pretty much anything I thought I knew. Maybe Prue didn't even kill those neighbors. They only told me half-truths about the creatures after all. I was left alone with my thoughts again, and after a few hours, a good one finally struck me. But I needed supplies. I left the building and I went to the nearest shop to gather the items that I needed, for what I needed. And for the time of night, I had to travel to a 24-hour supermarket. It took me half an hour each way on the bus, but I stayed focused. My bags were heavy and awkward on the way back to the block, but if it paid off, this was going to be worth it. I trudged up the stairs. It took me 2 trips on 24 flights of stairs instead of 14 to get everything in my flat and organize myself. It only took 16 in a large gym bag, but that was much easier to carry on the way back down, thankfully. I passed the man on the floor 5 twice. Now that I've noticed him, he made my skin crawl a little. I walked through the downstairs corridor, diverting away from the main entrance and passing all the ground floor flats to the door at the back of the building. The door at the back led to a small concrete area with a grass strip along the side and a bench decorated with a memorial plaque. This was the block's outside space. As is typical in the city, the whole bench was covered in graffiti. The memorial was unreadable. I got to work. I dug the strip of grass, turning soil with my new equipment. I had never been green-fingered, and to be honest, the shrubs I had brought had been so heavy. I had grown to resent them a little. I worked for an hour and a half. I was sweating and night had come. It was pitch black, and I had to use my phone torch to see what was going on. I had almost given up until I got up from my crouching position to stretch my knees. I reached my arms out and put my shovel down, and then I took a seat on the bench. I hadn't seen him arrive, but the man was already sat there. He wore a flat cap and a jacket, despite it being the middle of summer and a beautiful night. He just smiled warmly at the shrubs for a moment without a word, and eventually he spoke. "I've missed this place. Name's Derek.